And tobacco harm reduction is truly a burning issue for the region. 60% of the world's smokers live in Asia, along with nearly 90% of the global consumers of smokeless tobacco products, resulting in millions of preventable deaths every year, and where the majority of those who might want to quit smoking have no access to helping services of any kind.
Hi, I'm Samsul Kamal, the Program Director of HAA or Harm Awareness Association, and the President of our online movement MOVE, or Malaysian Organisation of Vape Entities, with over 55,000 members. The biggest challenge we face in regard to tobacco harm reduction in Malaysia is this. If this issue is tackled by the authorities as a health issue, as it is a health issue, then it would be easier for us to change the public health policy in Malaysia.
Asia has shown what can be achieved. After all, the e-cigarette was invented in China, while cigarette sales in Japan have slumped because of the take-up of a heated tobacco product. Consumers in South Korea, Malaysia, and other countries have also benefited from product access.
Hi, I'm Waki Gallardo. Thank you for allowing me to represent Vapor Ako in this important discussion. As a consumer advocacy group, Vapor Ako means I am a vapor, a self-declaration that applies to former smokers like me who have switched to significantly less harmful ways of enjoying nicotine. If there is one thing common among these countries, it is the high prevalence of smoking and the fear of innovative nicotine products that is being spread by health authorities themselves. In my home country, the Philippines, for example, the World Health Organization and anti-tobacco lobby groups such as Bloomberg Philanthropies exert tremendous influence on local policies that make it more difficult to promote THR as a public health strategy. This resulted in policies that actually discouraged the switch from combustible cigarettes to less harmful alternatives such as vapes and heated tobacco products. They're actually more restrictive than the regulation for traditional cigarettes.
Unfortunately, the failing Convention on Tobacco Control and a barrage of misinformation and anti-tobacco harm reduction propaganda is getting in the way of public health progress in Asia.
My name is Nancy Lucas, and I am the Executive Coordinator for the Coalition of Asia-Pacific Tobacco Harm Reduction Advocates, known as CAFRA. This is a coalition of consumer grassroots THR advocacy organizations that cover the entire region from Asia all the way to Oceania. The biggest challenge that faces tobacco harm reduction in Asia is not only government interests in tobacco manufacturing, which is pretty huge in the region, but it's also the reach of philanthropic colonialism. That is foreigners coming into countries using private foundations or NGOs that they fund to help guide governments in developing policies around safer nicotine products. These people do not want safer nicotine products available. They do not want the concept of tobacco harm reduction to be promoted or to be celebrated. And this is because it doesn't serve their personal economic agenda.
Many of these deaths are preventable if only tobacco consumers had access to safer nicotine products that were affordable, accessible, appropriate, and acceptable.
Hi, I'm Asa Salikup. I represent Cigarette Smoke Thailand, or in short, ECST. What we are really hoping for our country is that for those people in high position, the people who can make decision, I want them to listen, to look at the facts, look at scientific facts.
There are big challenges, but also opportunities for tobacco harm reduction in the region.
Hi, I'm Samrat Chaudhary, Director, Association of Vapers India, a consumer advocacy group focused on ensuring low-risk alternatives are available to adult tobacco users in India. I'm also the President of INCO, which is an umbrella body of 40 national consumer groups like AVI. My big takeaway from the report is that the region has nearly 750 million smokers and just 19 million vapers. This is a huge gap that Asian governments should act with haste to address. Asian lives matter, and it is time we started doing something meaningful about it, than pushing measures which are not only not working despite 2 decades of efforts, but in fact are making the situation worse. The report makes a very strong case for including harm reduction strategies in the ongoing battle to reduce tobacco-related mortality and morbidity in the region.
Hi, I'm Harry Shapiro, the lead author of Tobacco Harm Reduction, a Burning Issue for Asia. And I'm looking forward to engaging with you all when we will be launching this report.
I consider this a privilege to be a moderator for an event of such magnitude in the tobacco harm reduction space. Welcome everyone. I'm Jagannath Sarangpani, Jaggi from the Association of Vapers India, or AVI, consumer advocacy non-profit that is fighting for the rights of India's 270 million tobacco users to avail less harmful nicotine alternatives. And I will be your host and moderator for today's show. Kanav, the original host, had to drop out as his mother is in critical care having contracted COVID, and I do pray for her speedy recovery. Also, we have heard that Asa Sitigupta will unfortunately not be joining us as his father just passed away. Our deepest condolences to him and his family at this really difficult time. May his soul rest in peace. These also do put in perspective the tough and difficult times that we are all facing in many countries, facing a resurgent virus. Please, everyone, let us stay safe. KAC and AVI are co-hosting the launch of the report, Tobacco Harm Reduction, a burning issue for Asia. This report is now online and available to download at the GSTHR.org site. And I do encourage you to download this deeply engaging report that has been put together by KAC and edited by Harry Shapiro. To give you some insight, the report has been divided into 4 sections. 1, the smoking epidemic and the help available to smokers. Most of us here were smokers once, and we know what kind of help was really available to us to help quit before we found the safer nicotine product to switch to. 2, compendium of safer nicotine products that are available in the market today. This is a good comprehensive roundup of all that is out there. Then there is a section dedicated to these safer nicotine products and health. And finally, a detailed breakdown of what are the real barriers to health for all. Also available for download on this GSTHR site is the full report, Burning Issues, the Global State of Tobacco Harm Reduction 2020. That is the latest in the GSTHR's biennial series looking at tobacco harm reduction worldwide. In our panel today, we have the editor of the report, Harry Shapiro, and a host of consumer advocates from the region. Samrat Chaudhary from AVI and President INCO, Nancy Lucas, Executive Coordinator from CAFRA, Samsul Arifin from Move Malaysia, and Waki from Vapers, AKO, the Philippines. During today's event, you can type your questions for the panel in the Q&A box. You can open it by clicking the Q&A button. If you would like me to ask a specific question to a specific panel member, please remember to add their name. And you can also use the chat box to say hi to the other audience members. Questions in the chat are being moderated by our events team, and so there will be a short delay before your posts appear. We will get through as many questions as we can. We have an hour and 6 panelists, so I do request all my panelists to please keep your answers brief so that we can get an opportunity to speak. One last thing to all of you out there. I would request you to please tweet about this event with the hashtag THR for Asia. And without further ado, I now start our discussion with my first question to the author and editor of this report, Harry Shapiro. Harry, Firstly, I would like to thank you on behalf of the people in this region for putting together this highly informative and extensive report. What motivated you to write this report and why now?
Well, I think it's true to say that we are all used to the idea of the epicenter. We have epicenters of coronavirus in various parts of the world. We had it in Italy, in India, Brazil, all kinds of it. So it's a word that people have become accustomed to. And I think it's fair to say that the Asia region is really the epicenter, probably, of the smoking crisis, whatever word you want to use, because the figures speak for themselves. Half the world, 60% of the world's smokers of cigarettes, about half the deaths, nearly 90% of the people using relatively dangerous and unsafe smokeless tobacco products, which we should not forget about in this discussion. So I think really, if you look at just the straight, bald facts come out from WHO as to the situation in the region, but it also presents quite a lot of opportunities, which were touched upon in that opening video. So I think it's really timely now to start looking at beginning to chip away to the objections that there are to the idea of tobacco harm reduction.
Yeah, I read the report and it's brilliant. And I hope many more people, especially our policymakers, actually do read this because there is such a wealth of information in there. But could you share with us what your key takeaways from this report were?
Well, I think first of all, the situation in the whole region, opportunity, serious addressing the issues, because despite the problems that we've also highlighted here, the first commercially viable e-cigarette came from China, that various countries have seen their tobacco sales, cigarettes fall because of the availability of safer products. And also the region generally, some countries in the region have got a track record in innovation, in scientific and technical innovation. So I think the opportunities are there for the region to actually take a lead, bearing in mind, of course, that China is providing most of the world with its e-liquid and its vaping devices. But I think also the other key message that I would mention is that the solutions have to be regional and local. So the products that need to be developed need to be, like we said in the video, not only affordable, but appropriate and acceptable and part of the traditions of all the different countries, because it's wrong to just think of Asia as a region. I mean, it's a region, but it's got so many different cultures and views and opinions and so on. So you can't just, we mentioned Bloomberg and the money that's pouring in from the West. Well, the West cannot do that with products. They have to be developed locally. So, and the opportunities are there for that to happen. But as the report points out, there are lots of barriers to overcome in that process.
Yeah. Thank you, Harry. Yeah, watching, for example, Samsul's introductory video, there are 2,600 languages in this region, and that alone tells you what we are and what we have. And so nothing as a single stop solution would actually work. But I'm going to keep coming back to you, Harry. But I need to ask a question to Nancy here. Nancy, hi. Now, this report talks in detail about the country-level benefits adopting THR policies. Do we have any countries that have truly embraced THR science?
Well, as you could see in the video, Japan and South Korea are probably the leaders in the region for embracing tobacco harm reduction and embracing innovation. And it's interesting because everybody here is a vapor. Okay, we're all e-cigarette vapors, liquid vaporizer people. But yet in Japan and Korea, it's heated tobacco products. And it is interesting to me because in India, where they have a tobacco company, just like they do in Japan and in Korea, they're so anti any THR. But yeah, I would look at Japan and Korea for that. Yes.
And what do you think we could learn and take away as countries in this region for things like this, with countries actually having success with the THR and the rest of the region that almost seems to be pushing it back?
I've thought about this, and I've wondered if perhaps maybe in Japan and Korea, because they're more of a collective society, they're more about what's for the greater good for everyone, as opposed to other countries where it may be more individualistic and more materialistic and more capitalistic. And that is probably the number one reason why it hasn't been embraced in other countries in Asia, I think.
Okay, that's insightful. Then that's one thing that you've always had these unique insights that helps us come up with things. Samrat, see, one of the things, the major issues that was tackled in this report is the partial or complete ownership of state ownership of tobacco trade. The WHO and FCTC continue to overlook this glaring aspect, right, which is highlighted as a big no-no in Article 5.3 of the FCTC Charter. So much so that governments are now brazenly, open about their involvements. And yet, you and I are in India, and here's a government-owned tobacco company. Nearly one-third of it is owned, and they control nearly 80% of India's cigarette monopoly share. And this very company stocks shot up when the government ordered a vape ban. So how do you think we can enact THR policies when the state itself is so entrenched in tobacco trade?
Thank you, Jaggi, and hello to everyone. So, well, in India, that is a big question, and I think it is also globally because over half of tobacco production is controlled by these state-owned tobacco companies. So even though it is such a big part of the tobacco trade, I find it, you know, sort of strange that the FCTC is not focused on that. So while they have Article 5.3, it is not applied to these countries. And, I've tried to look up reasons, and I think I've read somewhere that it is the sovereignty of the country and that needs to be respected. So therefore, they are free to participate in tobacco trade. I don't think that is good enough argument because if the Article 5.3 makes a clear case for conflict of interest, then how are countries which are participating directly in tobacco trade part of FCTC? And they're not just part, they're coveted. To give you an example, India chaired the last COP in Geneva. So not only were they not invited, they were, given the chair for the convention. So I think the first step would be to keep bringing this up and get FCTC and the WHO to look at this issue with clarity that countries participating in tobacco trade. I mean, how do you expect a country? And you mentioned, that the stock of this tobacco company went up when the vape ban was announced. So how do you expect a tobacco trader to limit tobacco trade or at least see the situation with clarity? So I think that is really important. I think it's also important that we bring the focus back on health because right now, uh, the tobacco issue and specifically the THR issue is framed in financial terms and in trade with the little bit of emotive angle of tea news thrown in. But it is seen, I see most of these anti-THR articles open with the tobacco industry is doing this. Well, there are millions of smokers who could benefit from it. So I think a big challenge is to humanize or bring the focus back on people. The fact that 1.1 billion people smoke, they are the ones who are suffering, 8 million of whom are dying every year from tobacco use. And we should be looking at it in those terms. And if we started looking at it in those terms, it would also become vital that we offer them help to quit. Because right now, all or most of the measures are supply side measures. Their efforts to reduce demand by going after these companies, but little attention is being paid to the needs of smokers and also the people who have transitioned. And they talk about the sovereignty. Like I mentioned, they're talking about the sovereignty of a country to participate in tobacco trade. And I urge these governments to also think about their sovereignty when it comes to tobacco control, because a lot of their policies are being sort of led by foreign NGOs and foreign interests. So if you're so declarative of your sovereignty when it comes to being able to trade in tobacco, you should also think about that when you're implementing tobacco control measures.
That sounds almost utopian, Samrat, to have such expectations. But some sort. Malaysia too is well entrenched in tobacco trade, state-sponsored tobacco trade or state-owned tobacco trade. How about implementing such THR policies in a country like Malaysia, where you have this constant reminder that your state is indeed involved in tobacco?
Right. Thank you for having me. This has been an ongoing battle for us for the last 7 years. And I think the best way for us to go about this is to make them see that what we are doing is actually saving lives. Now, in achieving the balance between economic or gains and saving lives, the battle has always been that the economic factor will always win over policy of saving lives, simply because we are living in a capitalist system, sad to say. Now, a very extreme example, if I were to quote on how to illustrate this point, would be the gun control issue in America, where you can see that children are dying and they are getting shot all the time, almost on a daily basis, and yet the policymakers were to issue a solution to have more guns. So you see, this is not even a health issue; it's a death and life issue. And even so, they are taking the approach of not putting lives or health more important than economic gain. Now that's the sad part. But what can we do about this is that probably there is a very somewhat easy answer to it, which is increase the awareness of the policymakers. And also the important thing is that the policymakers and the authorities must be sincere. Are they sincere in actually changing the public policy? This is the question here. This is the issue here. Now we can keep on engaging them, and the position we take here in Malaysia is not as a pressure group, but more of a friendly party, because we want to engage them engage the agencies and the government in a positive way. We want them to be aware of what we are doing, and we are in a unique position where the consumers are much more well versed about the subject matter than the policymakers, and this is why we take the position of we want to be much more of a friendly party to the agencies and the authorities, rather than the pressure group, to increase their awareness.
Thank you, Samson. Thank you, indeed. Waki, I hope I got the pronunciation right. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, that's correct.
From the Philippines.
Thank you for having me.
I believe this is your first time on this program. And
yes,
it's really great to see you, joining and becoming part of the THR movement. I really enjoyed watching your pre-event video, and I really hope that you'll continue to be the strong force for the THR movement and a champion here. I have one question for you. Why do you think that countries, by and large, have this restrictive policy against vaping, more so specifically in Asia? What are your thoughts on this one?
Thank you for that question. The truth is, only a few countries in the region have existing laws on vaping and other safer nicotine products. The Philippines, my home country, for example, is still developing the regulatory framework that will govern the manufacture, sale, and distribution of these products. The problem is that the World Health Organization and some well-funded anti-vaping organizations are trying to influence the crafting of laws and regulations on e-cigarettes and HTPs. This results in policies that discourage the switch from combustible cigarettes to less harmful alternatives.
But I mean, I understand and get that aspect that we do have this gap in understanding and comprehension. But what is it that we can do to look at changing their mindsets? Nancy, perhaps you could throw some light in there.
Throw me under the bus. Okay. Again, we're talking about, like Samrat mentioned, it's a money thing. And sadly, a lot of countries, especially in light of the COVID situation and the crisis, the economic issues from COVID, a lot of countries are needing revenue, okay? And a lot of countries gain revenue from taxes on combustible products. That's number one. The countries that have tobacco interests see safer products as a threat to their bottom line, as Samrat mentioned. But yet, as Samsul mentioned, you're in public health. You're supposed to be worried about the health of the public. How do we get people back onto that focus that they're mandated to focus on when you have the World Health Organization ignoring and denigrating the concept of tobacco harm reduction? That's the real question, and I don't have the answer to that.
I guess, yeah. Well, getting back to you, Harry, now, one of the things that we have here are Western philanthropy, right? Or rather, if I could call it neo-colonialism. There you go, I got that right this time. Now, this is a real threat that we face here, right? The likes of Bloomberg and his $160 million per annum to go against vaping. Philippines, Mexico, and just before that, even India, for example, show that their interference is so very real. They often work behind the scenes, right? But what do we do really to counter such forces?
Okay, so I think I was very interested to see that politicians in the Philippines had begun to shed some light on this, and were not at all happy that the Federal Drug Administration in the Philippines had been taking money from Bloomberg to develop tobacco controls, much of which I suspect was actually being used to promote anti-tobacco harm reduction policies. And they clearly weren't happy about that. And I think that politicians should be encouraged to kind of turn the stones on some of this stuff and to look and see where their health policy funding is coming from. So I think that has to be brought out into the light. And there was a recent article published by somebody who had no connection with tobacco harm reduction at all in one of the philanthropy publications, who was also calling into question the agenda, if you like, behind the amount of money that was being poured into Asia and other parts of the world, and including the WHO. I mean, the WHO's tobacco-free initiative could hardly survive if it wasn't getting philanthropic money. And that particular organization has an anti-vaping agenda, there's no question. And that $160 million was simply to try and enforce a flavors ban in the US. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean compared to what else is being spent. So I think we've just got to keep on top of this. And so, for example, Professor Jerry Stimson, who's one of the directors of KAC, has been very robust of late in challenging the scientific and medical press when they publish articles which are clearly full of bias and bad methodology and poor peer reviewing and all the rest of it. And that's another kind of way in to trying to, like I say, turn the stones on what's actually going on here. So keep the pressure up is really the message for all the organisations involved in this. And I think I suppose the other point to make is that, just to pick up on what Nancy was talking about, that lots of people these days, because of COVID, have become much more interested in the evidence base. So, is it worth wearing a mask? Does social distancing work? Are these vaccines effective? Which one's dangerous? I'm pregnant. Should I have a vaccine? There's lots of focus now been put on the scientific, clinical, and medical evidence base within public health, and I think it may be utopian, as you suggested earlier, but it may be an opportunity to say, look, if you're this focused now on public health evidence base, of course the WHO doesn't help in this because they are actually one of the apparently credible sources for COVID, so, and Ebola and all the other diseases. So it's not surprising that people believe them when they start talking about, all the misinformation about vaping. So it's not surprising that goes on, because they are seen as a credible source. But I think now is not a bad moment to be pushing the evidence base wherever and whoever is prepared to listen, because it is in the public domain at the moment in a way it probably hasn't been before the pandemic.
I agree. I mean, evidence-based, unfortunately, is also very conveniently used. For example, in India, we have got this Kumbh Mela going, and well, the state's chief minister just says, well, the Ganga will wash away COVID. So when you have things like that, I think evidence, people are cherry picking evidence as it is, and they seem to be doing it for everything else, along with THR. Nancy, would you like to add something to what Harry just said?
Yeah, I would. A lot of this is education, and it comes from the ground up. And like Harry said, when you've got the WHO saying that this is a bad thing, or this is a good thing, or just issuing any kind of a guidance, people do see them as a credible source. So one of the things that I've done in my advocacy here in New Zealand, and also I'm helping you guys do, is it's about educating people. Okay, because one of the bigger, we talk about Bloomberg and we talk about the WHO, but one of the things that we really don't talk about much, and probably should, is the media. The media should be presenting, when the media presents something, they should be presenting the facts, both sides, and let people make their own decisions. And that, again, I'm being utopian and showing my age, because it used to be that way. And now not only are we fighting these anti-people, but we're also fighting regular people on the street because they hear something in the media and they take it as gospel truth, and it's not. So it's education is key. I think we all have to educate, and as much as people are willing to listen, and show them that, hey, listen, I used to smoke for 30 years and I had all these health problems and now I don't. Things like that. Humanize, like Samrat said, humanize.
Right. Yeah, I think we are all spokespersons in that sense. Every vapor is a spokesperson for the health benefits that we have all experienced having quit smoking, right? But once you're done coughing, perhaps. Absolutely, yeah, by all means, yes.
Right. See, what's happening now is that there's been ongoing exercise of perception shaping. The media has been, Nancy just mentioned just now, the media is shaping the perception of the public on what they want the vape to be perceived of. So what I'm trying to say here is that if the perception is being shaped at that level, at the media level, we have to go against them at that level as well. Meaning to say that if the perception is shaped at media level, we have to counter them at media level as well. We as what we are doing today is a good first step, but I think we have to go on further in shaping the public perception in terms of the facts on the right things on vape. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add on what Nancy has said.
I agree with that. I agree with that, and because the other thing is also we have traditionally, I guess, been reactive. I think we need to start becoming proactive as far as outreach for media is concerned. I think that's something that we really require to do to counter this. And but that's what it is. But Nancy, another question to you. Most of this. Sorry, I know I'm grabbing you and holding you all the time, but most of this THR, prohibitionism that's being pushed, and the logic that is always being spoken about is that the teens need to be protected against these addictions, and their health need to be prioritized, and so forth. How do we respond to this? I mean, we have all been teens once. We've all been curious. We've all had these things of going and looking. So, but how do we tackle something like this?
Well, we tackle it with the facts. For example, in the United States, yes, I know it's not Asia, but in the United States, teens dying from a lung disease from vaping. I mean, and it eventually came out that it was EVALI, which was the illegal THC quartz and vitamin E acetate, right? Again, bringing the media into this. The media was all over that one, right? Everybody heard it. Moral outrage, okay? But when the truth came out, when the CDC came out and said, oh no, this wasn't nicotine vaping, and the FDA actually grudgingly admitted it, you didn't see the media jump on that to present that fact. And yet those of us who knew that and were saying that, the media didn't want to hear from us either. So what Samsul is saying about, yeah, we need to attack them at the media level, we have to build bridges somehow within media to get them to even be willing to hear what we have to say. And that's a lot of the work that I've been doing. And I know Samrat has also been doing that as well. But it's an uphill battle. I just think you just got to keep trudging along, and hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because, again, we've been talking about, Western influence in terms of policies, but most of this information has actually been coming from America. The teen vaping epidemic, apparently. Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. There's bound to be experimentation with kind of novel products. But if you look at the latest federal statistics, actually even vaping experimentation has been going down. And the idea that vaping is some gateway to smoking is just complete nonsense if you look at the health statistics in America. So Nancy's right. And I think this is an important point because quite often tobacco harm reduction advocates, the general, the way people swerve around this is to say, oh, well, you would say that because you're all in the pockets of big tobacco, right? And that's one way of saying, we're not going to take any notice of you because you would say that anyway, wouldn't you? But if you're actually able to present facts, official data from the WHO in terms of the state of the world when it comes to tobacco, and when they say, well, it's a gateway to smoking, isn't it? Well, show them the facts from the CDC and the FDA in America that shows teen smoking going completely downwards. So you can show them official data and say, I don't care whether you think I'm in the pocket of big tobacco or not. If that's your problem, it's got nothing to do with us. We're just presenting you with data. Public Health England, a classic example of an organisation in the UK that didn't do original research paid for by a tobacco company. They did a meta-analysis of global information across the world and came to the conclusion that vaping was at least 95% less riskier than smoking a cigarette. So to me, this whole business about big tobacco conspiracy. It's white noise. It's out there and you can't ignore it. But if you stick to the facts and official data, you can at least say, well, look, this is the information. If you don't want to believe it, okay, but you can't say it hasn't been presented to you. And that's the same for media, politicians, legislators, health, medical health, doctors, whatever. Doctors are pretty crucial in this. And I think particularly in Asia, and you're going to shoot me down in flames in a minute, I'm sure, but I think in many countries, the medical profession carries quite a lot of weight. Doctors' opinions count in many of the countries, well, globally, but also I get an impression that in some countries like India, maybe other countries as well, if you can get the medical people on board, that certainly is going to help. And it may help specifically in a country where there is a large degree of the use of much more dangerous smokeless products, which we haven't actually touched upon. And that's where you need local products with local branding and local information and health professionals who are prepared to say, look, you've lost your mother, your father, your cousin, your uncle, whatever to these products. We understand that you want to carry on using these products because of the nicotine. Tobacco harm reduction is another important point when you're talking to legislators. It's not a question of supplanting traditional tobacco control measures. Nobody's suggesting that you shouldn't have smoking bans or you should allow advertising and the only thing to do is tobacco harm reduction. What we're saying is that all those measures, okay, but they're not enough. Look at the statistics and you see all what you're doing, all your bans and taxes and whatever are there, but they're not enough. So if you're talking about a war against smoking, you want another big gun in the armory. And the other big gun is tobacco harm reduction and the products that go with it.
Yeah, tools in the toolbox.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, look at India, for example. Actually, smoking is just 10% tobacco. It's chewed tobacco, which is a huge thing, which constitutes 90% of what the Indian population consumes. Samrat, now I haven't forgotten you. Okay. So you're also, you wear two hats, right? And you're also the president of INCO, which represents 40 consumer organizations across the globe, including ECST and AVI. Now, how do you feel consumers, and those representing them should respond to attacks that are kind of sponsored by the Bloomberg groups and so on and so forth? How do you really respond to things like this?
Well, so I was talking about Article 5.3, right? So while governments which trade in tobacco are invited to the COP and, there is almost no sanction on them, that same article is being used against consumer advocates and consumers in general to delegitimize them and cast them as stooges or front groups of the tobacco industry. Now, there are nearly 100 million people who use lower risk nicotine products. I think it's completely crazy to say that 100 million people are in the pocket of big tobacco, or the people representing their interests are in the pocket of big tobacco. This is, to put this in perspective, this is more than the population of entire Europe. That large bunch, if you're going to neglect, and I think this is a sort of a tradition which is going on, and just touching on the earlier debate, prioritizing the needs of kids or the underage, which is good. I think it's a good policy initiative to ensure that people do not take up more habits or more addictions. But it's also true that 1.1 billion people use these products. So you cannot wish them away, or you cannot say that those people don't exist. And the funny thing is, all this is coming from the people who are meant to help this constituency, this large number of people. So this is complete abandoning of users, and people who are now speaking for them are being simply cast as fronts of the tobacco industry, and I think this is a human rights issue, and it should be taken up more vocally and more strongly at all levels, because these are lives at stake. These are people. These are people who are suffering one of the gravest consequences of some substance use. So it cannot be neglected. Now, coming to how we can respond. So first, I think we have to be selective in what we respond to, because there's a lot of riffraff going on there, and we need to pick up battles. We need to because like Nancy pointed out before, a lot of times we are becoming reactive, as in we are fighting, we are dousing one fire, then going to the next fire, and which is preventing us from being proactive and doing the work and spreading information or letting people know about accurate facts. So it is important not to get completely swept away by this tide, because they're going to go on, and there's a lot of money behind that, right? So I don't think there is motivation to even understand what we are saying in a particular constituency, but we can obviously speak to the larger public who would be receptive. Having said that, we should also counter wherever we can, and I think a good way to go about it would be to figure out the right channels to oppose. So if it is an article in the media, then I think it makes good sense to write to the editor or to the newspaper presenting a counter view. A new trend is now that they're using scientific journals to attack us. And then it is important that you understand how to respond. Either you send responses to the journal, or as Harry Shapiro pointed out, Jerry Stimson is taking the lead in countering a lot of these negative portrayal and almost crossing ethical lines in scientific journals. And we were part of that. So INCO supported such action. And on social media, of course, we should speak a lot and tag whoever we can. So yes, we should push back, but do it in a calibrated way and do it with facts.
Harry, anything to add to some of these points and directions that Samrat's been talking about, which we could perhaps take?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's not. I mean, there's so much political and economic interest in this, which is running counter to public health benefit. Samrat's right. It is a human rights issue. It is a civil rights issue as well. Some of the people globally with the highest percentages of smoking are amongst the poorest and most disadvantaged people. Even people with mental health even in the UK, people with mental health problems and substance misuse problems, smoking rates amongst them are at 60 and 70%, which is way above the daily smoking rates for the rest of the smoking population. So there are some big issues here. And the WHO are signed up to international health treaties which talk about the universal right to health. They talk about nobody left behind. They talk about empowering individuals to take control of their own health. And I think that what's happening here is the WHO and governments are literally abrogating their public health duties in this respect. It's also worth bearing in mind, of course, and we've seen it with COVID, where public health bangs up against the demands to get the economy going again, to open up the football stadiums and the restaurants and the pubs and the cafes. And if you look at governments in the region and elsewhere, the weaker departments politically is always the health departments. Business and finance tend to kind of dominate the political discussion. So in some ways, I think that the delegates to the Conference of the Parties meetings are all health people, and I think they're kind of getting their revenge on their own governments by trying to push tobacco control policies, which I'm sure a lot of those governments would rather they didn't actually kind of happen. But Samrat's right. I mean, you pick your battles, you're more proactive, you address the challenges presented by the media, and like I say, there's a number of very able clinicians and scientists within the tobacco harm reduction movement that can literally forensically take some of these journal articles to pieces and demonstrate the poor methodology and the bias incorporated in them. So it's a battle on many fronts, and you know, it's all power to the people that I can see on this screen here that are doing their best to you know, make the case, make the public health case. I suppose another economic point, if we're talking about economics, is also worth pointing out to legislators and policymakers that you can allow access to proper tobacco harm reduction policies to help the situation in your country, and it's not going to cost you anything, or very little anyway, because public health interventions cost money, and a lot of countries have, you know, LMIC countries haven't got that money. But if you let consumers, and if you let technology, and if you let the private sector, they, in combination, they can do that job for you, so that you can, you know, focus on other things. So I think that's another quite, and that might actually ring a few bells in political circles when they think they can do this literally on the cheap.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harry, for that. Nancy, here's a question from Ishan Kapoor, and since you know you have this comprehensive Asia perspective, or you know, that's what CAFRA is. Which is the best and worst country in Asia for using e-cigarettes, IQOS, etc.?
Worst country would be India. Sorry, guys. Best country for heated tobacco would be Japan and Korea. E-cigarettes, possibly Malaysia or Indonesia. What do you think, Samsul?
The adoption to new things, new technologies has always been good in Malaysia. I think the vapors, the numbers of vapors here are quite high relative to those in Indonesia. Yeah,
that would be my answer, Jaggi.
Okay. Samrat, Ishan Kapoor has another question. Now, there are a lot of people in India who use smokeless tobacco. Is there any harm reduction solution available to them? And should India consider also banning these smokeless tobacco products?
Well, so like you said at the beginning, you know, this India has a wide spectrum of tobacco use, and smokeless tobacco forms the biggest pie in tobacco use in the country. But the Indian smokeless tobacco is deadly. You know, it leads to about 350,000 deaths a year, and it affects the lowest rung of society, which is disproportionately affected by tobacco illnesses or tobacco-related morbidity. So it is an important issue which we need to look at, and the way harm reduction works for smokers, it also does for the smokeless tobacco users. So there's something called snus, it's pasteurized tobacco. What makes Indian SLT or smokeless tobacco deadly is the kind of tobacco they use, which is high in nitrosamines, and also the chemicals that they add to it, which makes the whole thing deadly, and that flake lime that they have it with. Snus cuts all that out, and it's significantly up to 99% less harmful. And the way vaping works for smokers, that there is ease of transition. It is also consumed in a similar fashion, so it is a ready-made solution. We also looked at whether it can be made locally and at price points that smokeless tobacco users can afford. And yes, they can be. It just requires some will on part of the government. And the industry can then come in and play a role. I don't see why, if your question was why, whether lower risk products in the smokeless tobacco space should be banned, I think that is as foolish a decision as banning vaping in the country.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for that, Samrat. Samsul, somebody from the audience has asked you a specific question.
Right.
Now, IQOS, Glow, Plume. Now, these are okay for people in rich countries. Now, do tobacco companies only care about smokers in rich countries?
Seems so. Well, again, they are all about making money, and but to be honest, the way I look at things right now, there seems to be a major shift in terms of the direction of the big tobacco companies, because they are also looking into vape products right now, and I would think they are quite keen on getting regulation in place for countries like in Malaysia, because they see a big market for vaping products, and they don't see any real growth in terms of their tobacco products here in Malaysia.
Okay, there was a question from Nick Tooley. Are e-cigarettes banned in India? If so, how do people get them? Now, I don't think I need to ask anyone to answer this. I can do it on your behalf, on everyone's behalf. Yes, they are banned, and like any other product uh, which is banned, there is an active gray market that exists, which is actually part of the problem. We end up with zero or no regulation, and that's not good for the user or the industry or what we all are here to represent. So I hope, Nick, I've answered that question sufficiently. There was a question to Harry specifically from Dong. Yeah. Is there a way to make sure that every country need tobacco harm reduction, because some countries still make WHO as a direction to both health decisions, especially in Indonesia? Is there some way we can enforce?
Enforce tobacco harm reduction?
Yeah, to enforce WHO mandating. I assume that's what the question reads. Yes. Because
I think somebody needs to give them
of FCTC.
Yeah, I think somebody needs to give WHO more money than they're getting from Bloomberg to turn it around. It's a difficult one. I mean, as I say, I think that you see the WHO in a document they wrote back in 2014, I think, about what they call electronic nicotine delivery systems, ENDS. And they wrote a briefing for one of the previous Conference of the Party meetings in which they said that medicinal use of nicotine was acceptable. In other words, nicotine replacement therapy. Recreational use of nicotine is not. And that's quite a specific statement, that they are at root, and I think this is at root a lot of what the problems are, that the anti-vaping organisations, they understand that we're not talking about combustible products. We're just talking about people using nicotine in e-liquids or in heated tobacco products, or in a product like snus. And there is a moral agenda here, and the moral agenda is we don't want people to use nicotine. You know, we've got a drugs war going on, and it is very closely, I think, related to that. And we want to stop people using nicotine. And if you look at some of the statements that have come out from the Bloomberg-funded organisations, they don't just talk about cigarette manufacturers or the tobacco industries. They've now expanded their remit, I suppose, if you want to call it that, to other sorts of organisations that are producing nicotine products. So I think that the battleground here is which is why actually in a blog that I did recently, and it relates to some papers that have been written for the UK government, that we should actually now be talking about a difference between combustible and non-combustible products when it comes to tobacco control, not tobacco and non-tobacco. So really, in that sense, the FCTC needs to be rewritten, or at least some of the definitions need to be changed, which is a huge ask. But I don't know who came up with the proverb that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. But it's that kind of thing that we're talking about, and there are 100 million people using safer nicotine products, as Sam mentioned, which is not a small number. It's nothing like the number of smokers there are, but there's progress.
I agree. Perhaps even if they just took the FCTC and in letter and spirit, I think that itself would be a good change, because they do talk of tobacco harm reduction, except they've done nothing about it, right? I think even that as a first step would be good. Waki, a specific question to you. What do you think will make consumers switch to safer nicotine products? What's this barrier? What would help them shift? Yeah.
I think the government has an important role to play to make sure that the smoker are given alternatives that present less risks, that are more affordable and with less restrictions. If the prices of vapes and HTPs are taxed higher and are subjected to tougher regulations, then smokers may be discouraged from switching to these safer alternatives. So it is important that governments see the merits of tobacco harm reduction and include this in the framing of laws on vaping and HTPs.
Thank you. Samsul, a question from Louisa Ashcroft. Now, the report shows that Malaysia has the highest rates of vaping in Asia. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, it's normally the case when it comes to anything which is new, as I said earlier on, be it technology or anything that is revolutionary. Malaysian seems to be an early adopters to something which is new. That's one. Yet the other thing is that it seems that Malaysia was at number 2 or number 3 in terms of the consumer market for vape products back in I think about 4 or 5 years ago. So this shows that the middle income people in Malaysia are ready to spend, and they are very open and willing to change to something which is new, and the internet penetration is quite high as well, so they are well versed, they are learned, they get information, they know what's right and what's wrong, they don't just absorb information from the media. So when something that can actually help them to quit smoking, as vape can, so Malaysians are quick to adopt something like that. And it's not good. It goes without. It does not mean that when they adopt something that they are just doing it because it's a trend, but also because we have done research and we look into whether this can actually help us or not. And so I guess this is why vape has seen quite a high number of vapers here in Malaysia.
Thanks for that. And I hope all of you are continuing to tweet away with the hashtag THR for Asia. I really hope all of you are doing that. Hey, Sabrat, one question for you, which seems to bother all of us all the time. When do you think this ban in India will get lifted? That seems to be perpetually getting posted up here. It's something that even I want to hear. So if you could share something there.
Well, see, I wish I had a lot of good news, but let's see how the ban came around, because the government had been trying to ban it since almost 2014. 2 major courts ruled against, the policy direction they were taking. And finally, they used the blunt instrument of an ordinance and then followed it up with a bill in the parliament, which was passed by both houses of parliament. And the way the issue has been presented is in a very emotive way, that kids are dying on the streets and we need to protect them. So that it's become a hot button issue to a point where even the courts are reluctant to take it up. So I think what we ought to be doing is a lot of sensitization of policymakers, speaking to the medical community and sensitizing them, and also speaking to bureaucrats and the wider public about the benefits of switching the current smokers and smokeless tobacco users to less harmful alternatives. And I am hopeful because the science is on our side. There is empirical evidence that countries which are moving in that direction are benefiting in terms of smoking declines and over the long term in reduced death and mortality related to tobacco. Now, India has a huge problem, but it has these barriers in terms of the government's own participation and foreign interference, which come together to create a perfect storm. But over time, as facts emerge and as other countries which are pro THR take the lead or move ahead in terms of how they are controlling their tobacco problem, it will create pressure on the government to revise its policy. So it's, in short, it's not going to be immediate, but it is not enough reason for us to give up because there's so many lives at stake.
Thanks for that, Samrat. Harry, question to you. Do you feel there should be a specific THR strategies for LMICs which are sensitive to their conditions? And what would such a strategy look like? Also, somebody in the chat, Brijesh, posed a question. Now, if there is such overwhelming science that is talking on the benefits of THR and so on, why do certain governments continue to reject it?
Well, I think most of the reasons for that has kind of emerged in the conversations that we've had. It's apparently credible sources of counter information coming from organizations like the WHO. It's economic interests in the tobacco industry. It's the weakness of health ministries against other departments within governments, particularly in those countries which have 100% state-owned or significant state ownership in the tobacco industry, which is another reason that makes Asia quite unique in many respects, because the China Tobacco Corporation is the biggest tobacco company in the world, supplying about half the world with its cigarettes. So therefore, there are huge economic and political interests that will kick against the idea of safer nicotine products, even at the expense of public health. Because I think I suspect that probably what's going on here as well is there may well be a view within political and economic and particularly health circles. Well, if you don't want to stop smoking, just give up. Just stop. What's your problem? Lots of people actually do stop. So what's your problem? And I think that there's a lot of, this is a lifestyle issue. And this is, I think, is part of the other problem where public health works is in trying to tackle communicable diseases, like malaria and smallpox and TB and Ebola, and to a certain extent coronavirus when governments let them do their job. But when it comes to non-communicable diseases, like smoking, like obesity, like alcohol use, like drug use, public health struggles because you're then trying to actually change behaviours, and that's very difficult. And that's where moral agendas begin to creep into the discussion. Can you still hear me?
Yeah,
I seem to have lost sound.
Right.
Okay, sorry. I lost sound there for a minute. Anyway, so I think there are moral, religious, cultural, economic and political reasons, and it's a complex mix of factors that will mitigate against new and disruptive public health innovations.
I think we have lost Harry's voice out there.
No, I can hear him.
Okay, I seem to have lost Harry's voice. Okay, Samrat, Perhaps some closing thoughts on this one?
Sorry, what is the question?
No. The question was about LMICs and what our approach should be, perhaps in this THR space, considering the kind of problems that we face in interactions with this overwhelming force from WHO and so on. So, some of your thoughts to take off, add to what Harry said.
Well, see, I'm a strong believer of the fact that if there's any country or if there are any group of countries which really need harm reduction or tobacco harm reduction specifically, those are the LMICs, those are the developing countries, because it is in these countries that you have large population of smokers or tobacco users, and a majority of deaths, which has been pointed out. So they have a big tobacco problem. What they also have is lack of quick support to current smokers, and also lack of access to medical care should you suffer consequences. A person who is in the low economic group will find it really difficult to address the problems that arise from tobacco use. So with all these set of factors, why would you not want or give those tobacco users action to proactively guard or safeguard their health? So HR is a solution which is most effective, or going to be most effective in LMICs. And I hope the governments begin to see this value sooner than later.
Thanks, Samrat. Thank you, Samrat. Thank you. And well, we are unfortunately running out of time here, and I must sadly call this discussion to a close. Well, after joining our discussions today, perhaps a lot of you here want to know how you can support tobacco harm reduction here in Asia. Well, CAFRA has some news to share with you. Let me read this brief message from them. The users of safer nicotine products in Asia have started a petition outlining our demands to our country delegates who FCTC when they meet in November 2021. We demand regulations that are based on sound scientific facts and that consumers are consulted about laws that affect them. We demand that the WHO and its delegates do not ignore the basic human right to harm reduction. Harm reduction is mandated in Article 1D of the FCTC. We are asking for all interested parties in joining us by signing the right to speech petition that can be found on change.org. Nothing about us without us. Harm reduction is a human right. We're going to play this short clip about the petition now. Check this out at change.org/V4V/petition. I do encourage all of you to sign on and register and lend your support to this petition. I would also like to take a moment to introduce to you the Association for Harm Reduction Education and Research, or AHRER. It's a health promotion charity led by Dr. Sri Sucharita and a dedicated group of medical professionals and researchers in India, and this was established in 2020 to increase public awareness about harms resulting from various behaviors associated with tobacco use. Please do support their efforts if you can, since sensitizing the medical fraternity about THR is a key stepping stone to adopting tobacco harm reduction policies. You realize it is alarming that close to 4 million people in this region die prematurely due to tobacco-related illnesses annually, which is nearly half of all the global smoking-related deaths. It's obvious that the tobacco control strategies dictated by the WHO and well-funded organizations like Bloomberg Philanthropies are just not working. It is time to recognize that if you approach the problem the same way every time, you are always going to get the same result. It is time that WHO and the countries in the region adopt harm reduction as their strategy. The reality is that tobacco control and us both have the same goal. However, somewhere along the line, tobacco control started ignoring one key aspect of harm reduction. That is all we insist be taken into consideration. On behalf of KAC and AVI, I would like to thank all the panelists who joined us today for this truly engaging debate, and a final thank you to each and every one of you in the audience. Thank you for joining us and asking us all your questions. I have one final request before we close. Please support AVI in its fight to get vaping legalized in India, which has a huge tobacco health burden. It is time for all of us consumers and those in favor of THR to join hands globally and fight these vested interests, since as a collective we have tremendous power. Together we will fight. Together we will win. Thank you, and take care and stay safe, everyone. These are difficult times indeed.
Goodbye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.